Yo, 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 we are live. Today I have my good friend, my Cortex brother, Brian Maierhofer. Did I say that right?
Hofer, Maierhofer.
Maierhofer.
It's a tricky
Thank you
one.
for coming on, man. Brian is a men's family therapist, a men's coach, and in his Twitter bio, he labels himself as a therapy shortcut. I had a background in psychology. I thought I was going to be a therapist for a little bit. And so this is a very timely conversation. I'm excited to get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for that intro.
For sure. Yeah. So I want to start with one tweet that you wrote that I really resonated with, and then we'll just take it wherever the conversation goes. So the hook for a thread you wrote this past week was 1/4 of American boys grow up without a biological step or adopted father. 76% of public school teachers are women. Young men need guidance. Here's how to help. So I want to understand a little bit deeper your perspective on the situation that young men are in right now in the world and what you see as the solution to reclaiming this healthy masculinity, not a toxic masculinity.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, just the cultural narrative around masculinity, there's a lot of confusion and it's also really polarizing as well. And you look at the rise of Jordan Peterson, who I love. You look at the rise of Andrew Tate. I like a lot of what he has to say too, as well. And it's no accident that culturally young men grab onto these figures that they sort of idolize and put on this pedestal because young men are specifically looking for guidance into how to grow as a man and how to grow in their healthy masculinity. And I think that um, culturally we've lost an aspect of male guidance and male like elderhood that was so important in so many other cultures, specifically indigenous cultures. I wrote my thesis on rite of passage ceremonies and how these ceremonies were specifically designed to shepherd young men across the threshold of young adulthood into adulthood.
Mm. So many different directions I could already go there. I want to get back to the rite of passage thing because I experienced something that was similar to a rite of passage a few months ago, but I do want to touch on the point you made about Tate and Peterson and how young men look to these figures as almost like father figures. And I've done the same. For a very long time, I gravitated so hard towards Jordan Peterson. Like he was this strong masculine figure, but he also had the wisdom, which I was really attracted to. That's why I almost became a psychologist. Like I changed my major to psychology. If I didn't find this creator stuff, I might be a therapist like in the next couple of years. And so what's interesting is I wrote a post the other day that I wrote on Twitter and I just reposted it to the Threads app, like Instagram Threads app, without really thinking twice about it. And I tried to give like a nuanced, holistic take on how young men are lost right now. On one end of the spectrum, the like radical feminists will tell you masculinity is toxic, the patriarchy is oppressive, all that stuff. On the other end, we have like I use the example of the hyper masculine, like Tate showing cars, showing watches, showing Lambos, women, all of that. And I tried to offer a nuanced, balanced take. And I looked back at the app today, like a week later, without ever checking it. I got so many hate comments. I got like 200 hate comments on like how Peterson is an idiot. He's a radical. How even the fact that I mentioned Tate, I was like a misogynist. It's just like the world has lost its mind around these topics of masculinity.
Lost its mind. Yeah. First, the difference in threads and Twitter, you definitely got to know your audience a little bit
It's
there for
crazy.
sure. But, I think that here's my position. So you look at the popular cultural communities that exist on the internet. There's a red pill community. There's like this whole pickup artist thing, sort of this manosphere that actually 50% of it is really, really good advice. It provides short term gain in the sense of like some community, some brotherhood, some personal accountability, some motivational qualities, the necessity to course correct your own behavior, try and be better, all of these short term benefits to it. But long term, I think they actually facilitate a perspective and a point of view that isn't healthy and isn't sustainable towards long term fulfillment and happiness. and ultimately towards generative masculinity. So this is a word that is used. I thought I actually sort of had come up with it, but apparently a bunch of other people use it too. But I didn't know that. But healthy masculinity is generative. It generates opportunity, love, safety, security for self and for other. And so
Mm,
my perspective, what has changed me the most, what has been the most useful has been the 50% of, let's say, red pill that is actually solid, good advice. And then as a therapist and somebody who's had a long spiritual and emotional journey of recovery from XYZ, we could talk about that. 50% of the therapy world that is actually really positive and wonderful as well. So being able to fuse like the 50% of the soulfulness of therapy, 50% of the red pill, that's where I found wholeness. Like I like to say, a man is complete once he knows his competitive masculine edge and his soulful embrace of others.
mm. I love that. That reminds me of the Peterson quote. What is it? It's like, you want to be a monster, but you want to be able to control it. I love that. And I've been diving a lot deeper into these masculinity books, like from the spiritual perspective, like Way of the Superior Man, etc. We're actually
Beautiful.
one of my friends down here in Austin. He's a younger kid, 21, so a year younger than me. He started reading that book the other day, and he's like, "Dude, like this book is changing how I view the world. Like, can we set up a men's reading club around the book, The Way of the Superior Man?" So I'm excited to see how that evolves. I think it's a necessary conversation. But I want to double click a little bit on the red pill sphere because I actually don't know much about it. I think if I was maybe 5 years older, I might have been in that sphere, but it kind of had run its course by the time I got into all this personal development stuff.
Yeah.
So, could you highlight what is the red pill movement, and then what is the 50% that's good, and what's the 50% that might be toxic?
So there's a big emphasis on like game theory and evolutionary psychology in relation to mating strategies for
Mm,
dating for men and women, which regardless of the validity of like the difference in the mating strategies or sort of the game theory, because it is valid, I don't think it cultivates the healthiest framework and mentality in approaching that aspect of life. And I know I'm being a little bit vague here, but um, yeah. So I think, but an aspect of it that is really good is this sort of like conservative emphasis on personal accountability, on the recognition that you actually have influence over your life. You can make positive changes, form better relationships, do better things, and get a better result. So I think a lot of men, they come into like this red pill world from this like greater sense of victimhood, feeling like they're a victim to their circumstance, to their inability to have the type of sex or relationship that they want. And they understand, the antidote to victimhood is to see how you contribute to it. So then they get all these insights and nuggets into, oh, I actually have influence over my results here. And there's a community of people and men online that are supportive of one another, that lean on one another on this quest to better themselves. I just think long term, it actually breeds a mentality that, to reference Jordan Peterson, is a little bit closer to these dark triad qualities,
mm-hmm.
which is not a helpful, not a positive thing.
Mm. Yes. And with that dark triad, something I remember hearing from Peterson is that those traits, if I'm going to probably butcher them, you might be able to correct me. Isn't it Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopath? Is that the three?
Psychopathy.
Wow,
Psychopathy. Yep.
I'm surprised I pulled that out of the back of my head. But with those traits, what I've heard is that oftentimes younger women are very attracted to those traits because they're naive and they haven't seen the downsides of those traits. And so those traits to me, they can embody strength or perceived strength. But I think, as we know, like they're manipulative, they're not long term thinking. So, what are those traits that a healthy, holistic, you called it a generative masculine perspective, might adopt versus those dark triad traits?
Yeah. So I feel like, and I wrote a thread on this. And so I actually believe that in our darker energy, which is very primal, very animal, very hierarchical in a lot of ways, there's actually gold in that energy. And we don't want to completely, because then there are the men that completely sever themselves from their darker qualities and try and be the quote nice guy. And we could talk about that a little bit too. There's an amazing book about that. But I'm actually about understanding your relationship to your own narcissism, your own lack of empathy, psychopathy, your own relationship to power, because that's what
Mm.
Machiavellianism is. It's been manipulating people, places, and things to get closer to power. So I'm about the light triad lifestyle. And you can only live a light triad lifestyle when you've integrated and sifted through the dirt of your own dark triad energy to get the gold of its opposite, right? So the light triad lifestyle, as opposed to narcissism, it's altruism. But you can only know service for others and you can only be selfless in your action towards others if your own needs are met, right? You got to put your own oxygen mask on first. So this is how knowing your own narcissism allows you to behave altruistically, right? Knowing where you lack empathy in your psychopathy, or really knowing your own pain, from that isolation or from the lack of of connection, that's what then allows you to develop the empathy, which would be the opposite of that second quality, psychopathy. And then as opposed to pursuing power in Machiavellianism, you're pursuing empowerment, which is ultimately
Mm.
what you really want anyways, right? Like a guy doesn't want the girl or the car. They want the feeling that the girl or the car is going to give them, which is a sense of empowerment. And this idea of empowerment is really at the root of like the masculine psyche and the masculine drive. So
Mm.
I actually look to mythology and masculine myths of male development that inform me the lessons of the masculine and how to cultivate this healthy masculinity, as opposed to some of like the pop culture ideas that are on the internet today. So I studied depth psychology in from Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, James Hillman, and a big part of that was the study of mythology as symbol. So there's actually this medieval myth that is specifically about how a man turns on his healthy masculine. And I can either go one or two directions. I could just tell you what the ingredient is, or I could walk you through a little bit of the myth and what it all represents.
I'd love to hear the myth for added context. Humans learn through stories, so I'd love to
Yeah,
hear it.
absolutely. So the myth is the myth of the Fisher King. And
Okay. Now, also, while you're taking that sip, your whole brand is actually coming together. I'm connecting dots because I saw the light triad. You talked about that. I saw the depth psychology, but I didn't know what those meant, right? And so I think this is awesome to like go deeper into it.
yeah, dude, thanks you. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to. Yeah, so the myth of the Fisher King. And so when you study medieval myths, a lot of these myths have to do with a kingdom, and you need to look at the story arc and the kingdom itself as a symbol. So in our myth of the Fisher King, the kingdom is has begun in disarray. There's chaos. There's disorder. This is kind of Peterson's thing, right? Order versus chaos. And so at that starting point, you understand that the kingdom is actually symbol for the individual psyche. So at the end of the myth, when the kingdom finds order and health, that's the individual finding order and health as well. Does that make sense? And so
Yes.
then each character and the arcs in the story, they represent different aspects of the human psyche, different archetypes, and also different aspects of the journey of individuation, which is the Jungian thing of becoming a whole individual. So, anyways, so we have our Fisher King at the beginning of the story, and our king spends a lot of time fishing. He spends a lot of time in his boat on the river. Now, in these symbols or in these myths, the water is very often representative of the unconscious. So, understanding that our king spends a lot of his time on water is indicating to us that our king is lacking consciousness. He's dysfunctional in some ways. He's not who he could be. So, he spends a lot of the time fishing. He's on the unconscious and he has this wound. Very often, there's a lot of parallels to some other myths too, but this wound is to his generative function. He literally has a wound to like his genitalia. Very often in these stories, like the wound would be like literally in the hip or the thigh, somewhere close to our generative quality. So he's wounded. He spends a lot of time on this river on the water. And then our character who's going to go through the journey of development is Parzival, young Parzival, which actually means young fool. And a lot of these classic myths, they start with a fool. And what is a fool but somebody who doesn't know what he doesn't know? He lacks consciousness. So whenever the big story begins with a fool, we understand that the process of his growth is to be gaining some aspect of consciousness. So anyway, so Parzival is walking through the kingdom one day, and he stumbles upon, he doesn't know it at the time, but it is the king. It is the fisher king, and he's fishing on his boat, and he's wounded, and he's not well. And Parzival stops, and he notices the king. And he has an intuitive pull to ask the king what is wrong with him, ask him about his wound, because he recognizes his wound. But he chooses not to. He chooses not to ask the king what's wrong, and he instead ignores his intuition. And now, as a result of that, Parzival ends up going on this whole hero's journey quest where he rescues a fair maiden and he slays a dragon. Basically, all of these different symbols to understand that Parzival needs to go through his own suffering and his own pain and his own trials. And he goes through this whole big quest, and then he comes back to the kingdom. And when he comes back to the kingdom, he sees the king again fishing on water, and the king is clearly not well. And now, as a result of Parzival knowing his own wounding, his own suffering, instead he decides to ask the king, what happened to you? What is wrong? What do you need? And when he asks that question, the king is immediately healed. And then he is able to generate for his kingdom, and the kingdom finds order as well. So what is the thing that restored the masculine psyche? It's empathy. And this
Mm.
is sort of paradoxical because empathy seemingly on the surface is more of like a feminine component. It's a relational quality. It's more of a feminine energy. But in-depth psychology, and according to Jung, and a lot of the mythology indicates this as well, that it's actually when the man builds a healthy relationship to his inner feminine, to empathy, to all these other qualities, that then his wholeness is restored. So this story and this is an old medieval myth, and it's very clear. It is empathy that activates the generative quality of the masculine.
Wow. I love that story. Thank you for sharing. That's going to stick in my psyche for a long time. The ending you talked about, how the king, to become fully healthy in his generative masculinity, had to integrate a part of his inner feminine energy. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's so fascinating to me. So, with that, for the normal person now listening to this, say it's a young man. He's trying to get in touch with his masculine energy. Say it's me. I'll ask for my own perspective. How can I identify that those inner feminine qualities and integrate them in a healthy masculine way?
Yeah, absolutely. I in the young guys that I work with, I point them in two different directions. One of them is you have to find an outlet for competition, for the masculine need of pursuing empowerment, conquest, pursuing goals, whether that's in a physical pursuit like fitness, business, whatever it is. You have to have something where you can be Sisyphus. I don't know if you know Sisyphus, the guy who constantly is pushing the boulder up the rock.
Yes.
You have to find that outlet, and then you have to develop. You have to lean into feminine energy, not through the actual female form or body, right? So, like, a lot of men look to women to compensate for their own inadequacies in so many different ways. But really what they're pursuing is a sense of wholeness through a relationship to feminine energy, to eros, eros, which is it's one of the Greek words for love. It's this inspirational quality of life. So you have this masculine outlet of, nose to the grindstone. And then this other pursuit where you can adopt a slower energy and embody masculine or embody feminine energy through like other feminine ideals, maybe like cooking, making art, playing an instrument, like
Mm.
dance, creating, using your hands, like a slower, building a greater relationship to your emotional intelligence, because there's two different energies that are available here on the planet. One is an outward energy, which is masculine energy: go, pursue, conquest, get done, solve. And the other one is actually a receiving energy, which is the feminine, the reception. Again, there's metaphors all over the place on how this sort of makes sense. But then being able to slow down, learning to cook, garden. I worked on a farm for 4.5 months, writing poetry, different expressions of the body, like dance, or like really adopting this thing where you can learn that this need that you have for nurturing, you can give that to yourself in other ways and develop a greater relationship to the feminine outside of the physical form of women. And then when you do that, and then when you show up to a woman, and then when you're dating again or whatever it is, you're showing up incredibly differently, because there's not a dysfunctional need or a dysfunctional absence that you're looking to get compensated and met through a partner. And you're showing up way more holistically, and these two different aspects of yourself, the masculine and the feminine. Carl Jung believed that a man's soul is feminine and that a woman's soul is masculine. So we have our dominant energy. You and I our dominant energy is our masculine. So whatever our inferior energy is, that is the relationship that we need to find greater balance in to then have wholeness.
Fascinating. Wow. And what is the consequence of a man either delving too far into his masculine goal striving, conquering competition side while neglecting the feminine side of him? And also, what's the consequence of him leaning too far into his feminine without the active goal pursuit?
Wonderful question. Beautiful question. We don't have to look too far, or I don't have to look too far to see this, right? And like, these are the men that are so obsessed with work and so obsessed with status that they're not accessible. They don't know how to be present. They're isolated, they're miserable, they have a hard time connecting with people, and they just get dry, right? So like, I think of it as like moisture, like in, or like soil. Like, you need moisture, which is kind of the feminine quality, to nurture, to grow a healthy plant. And so if you get too focused on just like your harvest and what it is that you're doing, what you're growing, your soil dries up, and then you're miserable, right?
Mm.
You lose your why. You lose your eye on the service aspect of what it is that you're doing, and you get so just like hyper focused on the result or the work, and you just get disconnected from self, you get disconnected from others, and you become extremely isolated, angry, judgmental, and frankly, that inner resentment, that it turns into this unconscious anger and resentment that either gets projected on self in self-destructive ways or externally onto violence.
Mm.
And
And
then on
what
the other
happens? Oh yeah, I'll let you finish.
well, on the other side, and this is actually really important too, and this is something that a lot of the depth psychologists talk about, is that you can't allow I can't forget the exact phrasing that they use it, but you can't consistently fall victim to your own emotionality as well, your own inner feminine, right? Then you lose the generative quality, you lose that edge. It's kind of like, there was kind of this idea that in like the 60s, during the hippie movement, that like a lot of these men were actually just secretly angry, that they were suppressing their anger. Even, it's all love, it's all peace, it's whatever, but there's this bypassing quality of actually the groundedness of like being a person. And so you can kind of get too lost in the feminine quality as well, and lose touch with the groundedness of your body. And then everything's just an ideal. There's no action, there's no orientation around like growth. And you don't have any control over your emotionality as well. You're super
Mm,
volatile, right? So it's really about being able to pull from both of these different things, and it's a relationship. So that means it's dynamic. It's always evolving. So being able to find balance between the two of these allows you to sit in the center, which is where that healthy embodiment is.
that's so fascinating. You have me like introspecting right now in the activities in my life. And for the past like 3 months or so, especially over the past month and a half, after moving to Austin, I've been very goal oriented, building project, growing the business, launching stuff, launching cohorts, launching projects. And I'd neglected the playful side of things, right? And
Yeah.
so for me, something that's always been very playful for me, and it's a little bit of both because it also has a hint of competition, but like I love playing basketball. Even though I was a football player. I was more of a basketball player, like in my heart, like the artistic side of it, where it's just free flowing, creative play. Rather, like football is very linear, like put your head down, like bang heads the entire time. I was a quarterback, like at heart, so I never developed that part of my psyche. But I haven't been playing basketball for the past 6 weeks since I moved to Austin because there's no court around me and I don't have a car. And I've noticed I've lost touch with the emotions, with the heart, all of that stuff. And I've seen it come full circle a little bit over the past 2 weeks. So I'll give two examples. 2 weeks ago, I went to an EDM concert for like a real EDM rave for the first time in my life. And I'll just say full transparency, I'm open on this podcast. I tried MDMA for the first time. And at first I was like very self-conscious. Like I didn't fit in. I was kind of an outsider with the group. I wasn't having a good time. I told my friend, I'm like, dude, I think I want to leave. Like this is not good. And what happened was one of my very masculine friends pulled me into the middle of the circle and he's like, yo, come join us. And I was like, okay, fine. I'll just see how it goes. And then there was this woman who I didn't know at the time in the group. And she grabbed me. She's like, switch spots with me. You're going to be my protector. And I was like, okay. And I like really embodied that. Like that, it gave me like this sense of purpose throughout the concert. And I held this space for her to be the most free flowing feminine energy I've ever seen in my entire life. And it completely opened my heart up. And I'd realized I'd been misaligned. And it was extremely powerful. And then the other example, it's a much smaller example, but yesterday I found a basketball hoop near my place. I walked out there. I had a podcast in. I was just in flow state. And I felt so aligned today, the day after, because I got in touch with that sense of play instead of just like work block, deep work, build a project, you know? So those are two experiences that
Exactly.
have kind of really made this relevant.
Yep. You got it back in touch with like your own like sensibilities, right? And so one of the really, it's kind of reductionistic, but like one of the good ways to think about it is that the masculine creates the container, right? So in entrepreneurship, whatever, this is my schedule, this is my writing schedule. I show up here at a certain time or whatever. You have the container, the structure around it. But then, as you just said, what exists within the container of the creative act, this applies to relationship, whatever, then is the feminine free flowing. And the feminine has permission to do that and fully surrender because the container of the masculine is in place.
Mm. Yeah, that's definitely what happened. And I'd never experienced anything like that feeling of masculine strength and purpose. And then I went back and read Way This Superior Man, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is phenomenal. And so what it's brought to my mind, and I'm curious your thoughts on if this is true, but what I'm thinking recently is that for a man to self actualize or to become the fullest version of himself, he needs a strong feminine counterpart. Do you think that's true, or can a man become his fullest self in solitude?
I do not think it's one or the other. And I hesitate to, even though I mainly agree with the idea that union actually does provide as like fuel. I think that union can take different forms. It doesn't have to be with a female partner. The union can be to your creative impulse or to your own whatever. Like I do think you need the both. But if you even look at uh, evolutionary psychology and specifically in reproduction, there actually is this base idea. So women are the gatekeepers to sex and reproduction. And women's selective component, so ultimately they are the ones who choose. These are good genes. This is somebody that I want to have children with. Because they're the gatekeepers and because they are the selectors, that actually is one of the reasons why men try to be better or be more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And there's an evolutionary component to it as well. And actually some theorists believe that this is like a key component to evolution, which is really, really interesting. But I personally do believe that there is only so much work that can be done um, in solitude, in that you hear about, so many famous male figures that I greatly respect that credit their success to their wife, to their partner, to whom they're with. I do think that man does need a soft place to land, and in knowing that they have that secure place to land, then there's just greater energy and fuel to go out there and push boundaries and really seek novelty, because they know that there's safety in a return.
Mm.
And there's spiritual, sort of components to it as well. The idea of like sacred union. Um, Again, a lot of the depth psychologists, I mean, this is written about a lot. Joseph Campbell wrote about it a lot, is like as marriage, not just the act, but actually as the importance of the spiritual implications of it, as well as like sacred union of masculine and feminine, yin and yang together to find um I don't know, the circle, really, which is the symbol for the self.
Right. Wow. That's again, this is a such a fascinating conversation because it's like so prevalent to my situation right now, which is so fun. I read a stat the other day that said 60% of young men are single, and it could be plus or minus a little bit, but I found that number pretty high. And I'm single right now. And I'm wondering, why do you think so many young men are struggling to find a worthy partner? And what can they do to attract somebody who will propel them to new heights of self, new heights of progress?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of variables as to why sort of people are so frustrated with dating or people are dissatisfied. I actually saw a stat yesterday that for the first time, more men want to have children than young women, which I think is really interesting. And you'll hear a lot of these narratives about the loss of polarity, right? Men are becoming more feminine, women are becoming more masculine, whatever. I kind of want to like leave that to the side a little bit, but um, so I've done a lot of dating coaching. I've specifically been a dating coach for a lot of men, and they always get very disappointed when the very first thing that I tell them to do, which is to take 3 to 6 months and not date. I actually call it a withdrawal. Like
Okay.
literally take 3 to 6 months and completely remove yourself from feminine attention, validation, nourishment, really, in any ways, because you have to see who you are without it. Right? You have to learn how to meet some of these base needs without it, and really see actually how much power your own need for validation from a woman has over you and influences your decision making and all of that. And during that process, to gain confidence by engaging in feminine energy in these other ways, which we kind of talked about already. But I think, again, there's so many ways I could go with it, but I think dating apps are a huge implication. I think even just social media and Instagram, like the human brain isn't designed to have this many options in mate selection. It's not good for the brain, right? Like
Yeah.
you and I are not supposed to see this many beautiful women in our lifetime. Like, we're just
Right.
not, you know?
Yeah.
And I do think there's been a loss of emphasis on traditional values or family values, and that's a part of it as well. And a loss of interdependence and even intergenerational interdependence. Our culture is so individualistic, and that's really like pumped into the brains of everyone. And there's like this whole like Sigma male thing that exists online and like TikTok spaces. I don't know if you know the whole Sigma male.
Not really. No. Can you dive into it really quick?
It's like it's the Bateman meme from American Psycho. It's basically the Sigma male is like this mysterious kind of figure, lone wolf who doesn't need anyone. He can't be
Yeah.
understood,
Yeah.
and like that's like touted as this good thing. But again, like there's this paradox that takes place. I kind of talked on before where you get short-term benefits but suffer long-term consequences. So the short-term benefit of becoming a Sigma male is like not caring as much about what people think about you, relying more on yourself to get your needs met, becoming more independent, more accountable to yourself. That's a good thing. But the long term consequence is you're isolated. You don't have your relational needs met. You don't have community. You feel different from everyone. Right. And so there's kind of this funky thing that goes on here within this, like this dualistic perspective of paradox.
Yeah. And you mentioned with your dating clients, the young men that are dating to take a break. I find that really interesting, and I want to actually swing to the other end of the spectrum because this seems like the majority of young men on the internet and just that I know is they're actually already in recluse. They don't want to go out in the world and engage. They would rather stay in and watch porn and go on Instagram and jerk off to girls on Instagram. Like on that end of the spectrum, what would your advice be to that type of person to start integrating into the world?
For sure, for sure. Well, a big part of the withdrawal, too, to be specific, that includes pornography and idealized images of women. So it
Mm,
would be like unfollowing all the Instagram models, not watching
yeah.
porn. That's a big part of it as well. But on that end of the spectrum, which is, I'm glad that you brought this up because there are the two different frameworks, the one who's like overconsumed and the one not so much. It's developing more of a relational skill set with everyone. And so so I tell my guys to focus on three qualities as they are trying to connect with people, right? Which is like playful. I'm forgetting the third one right now. Playfulness, safety, and really just like approachability. And the playfulness, like not taking yourself so seriously a little bit. Like if somebody has those three qualities, people want to be around you. It's magnetic.
Mm,
So just in being like to be a seductive person, you have to seduce the world. And I don't just mean this in like a sexual way, but I just mean in like magnetism, right? Like if you show up in the world in with playfulness, with some approachability, with a smile on your face, transmitting safety, and just starting to engage in the real world with people out. I have some clients. I had a client who I worked with for the first 6 months. He didn't leave his house. Right. I gave him a piece of my homework was, okay, over the next week, you're going to leave. You go to the grocery store, go to the movies, whatever. When you come back and meet me next week, I want you to tell me 3 eye colors of people that you saw. You didn't have to say hello. You don't have to do anything, but that means that you had to take a second as you're checking out at the grocery store and look this person in the eye and see, okay, blue, right? Brown. And he came back the next week with his 3 eye colors. And you kind of build on these stacks, right? So then
yeah.
the next piece was, and then there's how's your day going? Oh, what time do you get off? Has it been busy here? That type of stuff. And slowly through like an exposure therapy of putting yourself in a situation where it feels like it's going to consume you. And then you come out on the other side and realize you weren't consumed. And one of the things that I really try and just drill into the brains of the dudes that I work with, specifically when it comes to approaching women and trying to get a date. So if you approach in a nice, cordial way a woman on the street and ask her out on a date, and she says no, she did not reject you. She does not know you. What she rejected was the moment you created for her, the moment that existed between the two of you. So if you can get better at creating better moments with more playfulness, more safety, more approachability, you're going to have better results. But it's not about you because she does not know you. All that she knew was that moment that existed between the two of you. And sure, maybe there was an attraction, whatever. But you have to really, really try and focus on depersonalizing as well.
That's such a powerful reframe. That is such a powerful reframe. It's not about you. She does not know you. That's very, like, because you can easily, if you do internalize it as, oh, she rejected me, then your self worth takes a hit. But it's like, no, she just rejected the idea, or the moment that we were in was not perfect. And then you can be more playful in those moments. And I actually wrote a thread about this today, not with as much depth as you might write these about, but it was 5 ways that I've overcame social anxiety. And the first way, and the most powerful way for me, has been mastering those micro interactions. So
Mm,
what I've done now, and it's just such a part of my life that I can never go back to what it was like before, is every time I go to the coffee shop in the morning, I chat with the baristas for like 10 minutes. Like, and it didn't start as 10 minutes. It started with like, how are you? And that was even scary at first, right? When I had a lot of social anxiety, but you just stack those small wins, like asking the grocery store clerk, like, how's your day going? Like, what did you do this weekend? Just like a small question. Ram Dass actually has a frame like you're helping them come up for air and break out of their monotony, where like the coffee shop barista, everybody's just ordering coffee, they're just going through the motions. You actually showing interest in them and asking them a question breaks them out of that monotony. And now they're interested in you. And now you have a little bit of a micro interaction. You have a little bit of a friendship. And now when I go to the coffee shop every morning, like my energy for the rest of the day is higher because I just had a great 10-minute conversation with one of these cute baristas. And now, like, this energy is just fueling my work. It's awesome. And so, if anybody out there is like, I don't want to approach people in public, I don't want to talk to people, start with those interactions you're already having and just master those mini interactions. And you'll build these social skills over time because they're skills. That's the biggest thing that I've learned
exactly.
too. Social skills are skills. Any skill can be improved with repetition and iteration and exposure.
100%. And you just reminded me actually what the third quality was, which was not approachability, but curiosity.
I was going to say it might be curiosity when you were talking.
Yes, yes. Genuinely being curious, like being, to be interesting, you have to be interested, and so much of this framework, it just on a more philosophical sense that I actually learned and really harnessed during my time on stage as an actor. Right. So we talked about it a little bit, but I spent 7 years acting um, on TV, done some film, and I've worked opposite A-listers. Like I have a good little career. And so on stage or when you're in an acting scene, curiosity is so, so unbelievably important. And also discovery, being present enough where each sort of moment that comes up is a novel moment, which is hard when you're acting because you know what the next line is, what the next piece of blocking is, what you're supposed to pick up, what you're supposed to do, or whatever. But if you can be in discovery, be in novelty, and be in curiosity, that's when the work is good. So you're so interested in actually what's going on between you and your scene mate, whatever. That's how you be interesting, is because you're actually invested in this moment that is taking place right here. And so it's presence and it's this embodied quality that people want to be around. And all of this stuff, and especially the social anxiety, actually really, really folds into my work that I do as a therapist, and specifically with my specific modality of somatic therapy that I use, like body oriented therapy, because what you're looking for is safety in the body and safety in your ability to express yourself. So when somebody has social anxiety, there are a bunch of thoughts that are associated with the physical experience that they're having. So they're thinking to themselves, I don't fit in, everyone's cooler than me, I don't know what to say, da 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 da. The story that's taking place up here is actually justifying the experience in the body first. The nervous system and the physiological reaction takes place before our thinking and before our emotions.
Mm.
So there are tools and ways in which we can just bypass the story, which, yes, has some value in many ways, But I also, when I'm working with people, like I don't care as much about the story. I'll listen to it, but let's get right into the root of it, right? If we're attacking this, it's like we're trying to like trim the leaves of a leaf instead of pulling out the root, when the root is the body and the experience that you're having in the body. So when somebody's struggling with social anxiety, I say to them, next time you're in this situation and you feel this coming up for you, see if you can orient yourself not to what's going on up here in the mind, but to the experience that you're having in your body. Are your hands a little sweaty? Is there tightness in your throat, tightness in your chest, your heart? Every like emotion that we have, there's a correlating physical experience. And the more we can build an inventory of the physical experience and awareness around it, the more then we can prescribe tools to override the physical experience. And the mind ends up following the feet and the body every time.
Mm. And when somebody is experiencing this social anxiety, which is rooted in the body, was it a traumatic event in their life that led to something being stored in the body? Is that how it arises?
So, I mean, it's super nuanced, right? And I think that like the internet and the digital sphere has a huge role on this. But ultimately, what's going on in that moment is that you're lacking secure attachment to self, you're lacking safety. And I guess to sort of give like a blanket overview, educational piece on this somatic work is that it's really fear that's being held in the body. It's just energy that's being held in the body, right? So when you study animals and mammals, so our prefrontal cortex was built off our mammalian brain, the piece right before. And so what happens when a mammal gets afraid? They tighten up, they hunch, they constrict, right? Even we have these colloquialisms where it's like, oh, you almost gave me a heart attack, or you scared the shit out of me. We say that because the body stops. And so what actually happens when an animal is in fear is that the bloodstream momentarily coagulates, meaning that it momentarily freezes. And this is a physiological response because if there was a real injury, if you get a cut, you're going to lose less blood. That's why the bloodstream coagulates and freezes. So over time, when people have trauma and when they live in fear, the body is really tight and constricted and like hunched. And you can see people when they walk, their shoulders are hunched over, their heads down. They're basically, their body is displaying a submissive posture. And so that energy, the fear gets stuck in our nervous system, in our bodies. And what we need is to have tools to discharge that energy out of the body. It's not fitness, it's not health and exercise, it's something very, very specific. And it discharges that old stale energy in the body. And then you can retrain the body through the nervous system to actually learn how to transmit more openness, expressiveness, and safety instead of fear. And so this is kind of the base dualistic framework that needs to be understood and that like I help guys understand when I'm doing somatic work with them. At any given
Yeah.
moment, like we're really opening and transmitting like love and abundance, or we're constricting in like fear and submissive postures.
And what is that tool you referenced that can expel that fearful energy?
So there's a bunch of them. So somatic shaking is really good. So there's a YouTube video that's just really cool. I can send it to you if you want to link it. And it shows a polar bear, an animal actually going through this process of discharging. And so it's an old video, and it's a polar bear being hunted down, and then he gets tranquilized. So he's obviously in a lot of fear as he's getting hunted down. He gets tranquilized. And then as the animal starts to come back online before it like regains its consciousness, the animal goes through this crazy shaking process. It almost kind of looks like a seizure. It shakes and discharges all of the pent up energy out of its body. And then it takes a really big breath. And then it comes back online into consciousness. And so that is this somatic term called discharging. And so there are a couple different ways you can do it. You can do it intentionally through somatic shaking, which is literally like people that have hardcore anxiety. Like I tell them to shake, like you got to like shake the energy out of your body. There are also some like more higher level stuff where you can put the body in a position through specific postures, through specific fatiguing, kind of ideological frameworks as well that can actually allow this process to happen organically on its own. I mean, I've been doing it so long that I can lay down in my bed and within 90 seconds, my body's immediately going into the process.
So you're like in your bed shaking, like when you do this.
Yeah, yeah. Like, and you can kind of through your conscious awareness, you can feel where like the nucleus of the energy is. So the how it starts, it's called TRE, which is Tremor Release Exercise or Trauma Release Exercise. David Berchelli, who worked a lot with Mother Teresa, he sort of coined this thing. And it starts actually in the pelvis. So in somatic work, you want to start in the face and you want to start in the hips as well. The face, because this is our mask, literally our emotional patterning, we end up holding in our face, right? If somebody's upset all the time, they hold that emotional patterning in the face. You want to break up that fascia, learn how to reprogram it. And then also the pelvis as well. So you put yourself into a specific body posture, you fatigue the body and certain muscles in a certain, so you're oscillating between stress and relaxation, stress and relaxation, stress and relaxation, eventually to the point where the confusion of what's going on in the body between stress and relaxation kind of hijacks it in this way where then this older part of your brain, the mammalian brain, supersedes the logic of your prefrontal cortex. And yeah, I mean, my body literally starts to move on its own accord. Like I'm not moving. It's very, like you can watch videos on YouTube. It's not a seizure. It's not dangerous. Um, but yeah, it's a trippy thing when it happens at first because like my legs, my limbs, my chest, my body is literally shaking and moving without me consciously moving it. And it'll happen for a couple minutes. Sometimes if I'm more stressed or if I have more stuff going on, maybe it's a longer session. But then you come out of the session and you just feel so light. Like you've literally, and like literally like the musculature of my traps and everything is like lighter. And there's all sorts of tools and frameworks that go along with this, but you can feel a significant difference. It's one of my favorite tools for self-care and to relieve stress. So I got some more. I'm actually I'm putting out a free product on somatic therapy here soon to give people like the 101 because I want to get this out to people, man. Like this, it's changed my life over the last 3-4 years. And you can get the benefits of like therapy or healing without sitting in a room talking to somebody for hours, doing this like mental masturbation or whatever, which I find value in, but a lot of people don't. And so for people that
Mm.
don't believe in that, I also think it speaks to men really as well because it has this physical component and it can actually be kind of primal and kind of rugged and kind of like tough on the body. Like you feel like I feel like like a beast, because like it's kind of intense.
Yeah, I cannot wait to check out your product. And anybody that's interested, follow Brian on Twitter. I'll post a link below and be on the lookout. But can somebody like take an actionable step by themselves? Like I'm asking out of my own curiosity. I want to try
Yeah.
something like this. Or do you need like a professional to guide you?
You don't. You don't. So the very first step is what I call a physio emotional inventory. So I would encourage you or anyone listening to set a reminder on their phone 5 different times throughout the day. Really, the first beginner, really early step is building greater sensory awareness to your body. Yoga Nidra, you can look at Andrew Huberman. That's going to be really helpful for that. But this physio emotional inventory. So, boom, the alarm goes off. Okay. And so I ask myself, what is my emotional palette right now? I'm a little overwhelmed. I'm a little irritated. I'm a little bit uncomfortable. Okay, boom, I wrote that down. Irritated, overwhelmed, uncomfortable. What is my sensory experience of my body? Oh, my right hand was just clenched up. I'm feeling tightness in my left trap. There's a bit of a pressure in my chest. Okay, write that down. The third piece, what is the context? What am I doing right now? Right? I'm on a work call. I'm studying for my test, whatever. So then I have this inventory: irritated, overwhelmed, constricting in my right hand, tightness in my chest, studying. So you can see this is my quick inventory. All this is my state. This is the circumstance and the environment that is leading into this state. So I do that 5 times over one day, and then I do that over the course of a week. And you look at this massive physio emotional inventory, and you begin to see, okay, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I have this specific manifestation in my body, the correlating experience. I hold my overwhelm in the clenching of my right hand and in my chest. It very often comes up when I'm doing something challenging, like studying, right? Or let's say I'm cooking dinner with my girlfriend, and that I'm joyous and happy. And in that instance, my feet are really connected on the ground. So like you see the patterns of your states. When I feel this way, this is the experience in my body, and this is what is going on. So you begin to connect the dots to feeling, sensory experience, and circumstance, and you just build this greater awareness and this skill set, because this awareness is then what you use in the somatic therapy work, which is actually more like art than anything else. Like it's more alchemy than anything else.
Mm. And when you say alchemy, do you mean transforming emotions?
Yeah. Yeah. You're transforming feeling and emotion in and through the body and alchemizing it in a way that is really healing, but in a way that like can turn it into positive things as well. And also like release it. Like when I'm doing my somatic practice, I'm having all sorts of emotions coming up for me, all sorts of physical experiences in the body, and I know how to move and utilize the energy through the different emotions into the different aspects of the body to then get it out and put safety and relaxation in the body. So I've actually processed the emotion and the experience through my body. Sometimes it
Mm.
comes out in tears, sometimes there's anger, whatever, but it's all just energy. It doesn't matter what it is. So you learn how to harness and play and make the energy malleable ultimately, so that you know that you have influence over like yourself and your state and the way that you feel, etc. It's incredibly empowering.
And so, if I were to take this personal inventory for, say, a couple days to a week, and I identified, okay, I store a lot of stress in my chest, I store a lot of tension, like in my temple or wherever it is, would the actionable step to be like lay down in the bed and like bring those body parts to mind and like let them
Yep.
loose?
That's one of them for sure. So for example, like if you're feeling grief, if you're feeling really sad and you notice that you feel that experience in your chest, instead of necessarily like going into the grief or the sadness and maybe just crying for 20 minutes, which is really valuable too, you could sit down, lay down, get into this meditative place where you're actually really focused on the physical sensory piece. And then through breath, maybe through a little bit of massage, there's kind of some other tools and stuff too. If you can release the tension in the body, you'll notice that it impacts the emotional component as well. And it doesn't mean that it's going to make the emotional component go away. It actually make the grief more present, which is a good thing because it means it's coming through you, you're releasing it. But you play with the connection between emotion and the body sensation, but you really don't go into the emotion. You more so go into the body and see if you can release tension. Yeah, this is called somatic experiencing. Peter Levine, he's one of the main guys with this specific tool, but there's really three tools that are kind of like the mothership to somatic therapy. That somatic experiencing is one of them.
Mm. Could you briefly run through the other two, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, the other one is TRE. I think I mentioned it a little bit.
Yeah.
Tremor Release exercising, David Bercelli. The other one, I'm not sure what the specific name is. It's called like radical undoing. It kind of combines holotropic breathing. It's kind of the mothership. It combines holotropic breathing with the TRE, with a little bit of the somatic shaking. I mean, there's a bunch because it's really similar to bioenergetics as well. But I mean, I'm an esoteric guy, but a lot of people aren't. So I try and make it really practical. But somatic experiencing and TRE are probably the most two most popular right now.
Wow. Yeah,
So
it's so
David
interesting to
Bercelli.
me. because this is like nothing like I learned in psychology class at college. Like this is kind of on the cutting edge, it seems. Like this is maybe going to be in the mainstream maybe shortly.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, in my master's program, I had one class on somatic work. One, which is crazy to me. But what's really cool is that it is actually a return to what a lot of esoteric philosophies and more mystical practitioners knew, and also what a lot of shamanistic and indigenous qualities. I mean, if you you're even looking at, let's just look at two basic shamanistic tools. One of them sort of being like chanting. We know now, science has proven that guttural sounds in the back of a throat, like a activates the polyvagal nerve, which is responsible for turning on our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest state. So these indigenous communities were activating their polyvagal nerve intuitively. Another one is like trance, right? Um, it's just theta waves, right? Like in neuroscience, I read something on MIT very recently, which is, just to sum it up, basically, they're getting close to proving that the mind actually exists in the body, which is something that depth psychologists have believed and known for a long time, right? So our emotions, our memories, our traumas, all of that is stored in the body. So the brain evolved basically solely to maintain and regulate safety in the body. So the brain is just the hardware, like a physical computer, right? The mind is the software,
Mm,
the OS system. Now the
mm.
mind isn't tangible in the way that the brain is, but the mind becomes tangible through the body. Does that make
Wow.
sense?
Yeah, I'm with you. This is awesome. Like this is so it's so new to me, but it seems like this common theme of different things I read, different people I talk to. It's like this merging of science and spirituality in some way where all of these ancient traditions, now science is catching up, and for a while they're split and now they're merging together. It's wild
Yeah.
to kind of see this unfolding.
It's like one of my favorite sayings, when the scientists, reach the mountaintop, they'll find the mystics there waiting for them.
I love that one. I love that. And something that came to mind too, like actually coming full circle back to the start of like a rite of passage for men or a rite of passage for somebody becoming an adult. It comes full circle with this idea of like purging or releasing trauma to the body. This is where the connection happens. So I had an ayahuasca experience about 4 months ago. And a common theme that people were talking about was like the purging of things through the body. I didn't experience any like throwing up purging, but I experienced a lot of yawning. And it seems like that was emotional release, similar to like a somatic practice or a somatic therapy. And
Yep.
another thing the ayahuasca symbolized for me, because I never had a formal graduation because I didn't finish college, was like a actual graduation into manhood, a rite of passage into manhood. So maybe we
Yep.
could come a little bit full circle on the rite of passage thing. Like now in our modern culture, we don't really have that, at least not in the Western world. What do you see as some solutions to that? Is it an ayahuasca ceremony, or are there other ideas that we could work with?
Yeah, I think so. We do have them, but they're not symbolic and they're not oriented around the emotional and spiritual components. And also, so much of what a rite of passage was designed was to introduce the young person into a belonging in the community, but really in role identification, as in what is your service and your role to the community. That was a big part of it as well. So, I mean, but like, what is a graduation but a rite of passage? It's just so it's a threshold marker. So rite of
Yeah,
passage work in three different stages. There's the severance, which is what are you leaving behind? The middle phase, which is my favorite, which is called liminality, liminal, betwixt and between. It's like the purgatory, it's the formlessness. And then the incorporation, the integration. A psychedelic ceremony is very similar to that. The actual psychedelic experience is going to be your liminal. I think I think people can create these for themselves through symbolic action. But I do think collectively we need it's hard to prescribe, I don't know, something collectively, but ultimately the theme of what they represent, ultimately we just need our elders, our older, more learned, more wiser, more advanced men and women to share and curate themselves and their experiences for those underneath us. And it
Mm,
can't just be in classic mentorship, and that's kind of what my thread was about, just in like sport or business, which is what most men really kind of turn to get this experience with. There has to be the emotional and spiritual guidance. But
right.
from writing my thesis and doing, all the research on the literature of rite of passage, it became very, very clear that young men become men through relationships with other men.
Mm, that's good. That's
That
really
became
good.
very, very clear.
And
Um,
with those pursuits, like a business mentorship, a sports mentorship, a college graduation, to me, they lack the depth. They lack spiritual depth. They lack
exactly.
symbolic depth. So, do you think we've lost that as a society because we've lost religion or God?
Yeah, I think that people need containers in which they can develop and mature spiritually. And I think
Mm,
that that is one of the main benefits to religion is the specific container and guidance that creates that for younger people. Because spiritual energy, in many ways, is very similar to sexual energy. There's a lot of correlations
mm,
there and a lot of the philosophies, but um, spiritual energy unharnessed and run amok can be incredibly dangerous. And we don't need to look any further than some of the coaching spaces to see this, because there's a lot of spiritual narcissism and spiritual manipulation and a spiritual abuse really that takes place probably most of the time by well-intentioned people. But I think that because we just have a framework where this like spiritual idealism is like so rampant, and it also serves as such like a bypassing tool, like people overemphasize or overexplore spiritual pursuits as a way to escape their own emotions and their own like earthly experiences and like physical body experience. And I think that we do need containers, and it doesn't have to be religion. Although the older I've gotten, the more I've actually had a return to more classic structured religious institution, um, for people to learn how to harness and actualize their spiritual processes. Because there's a lot of ideas out there, and there's a lot of different directions, and there's a lot of, I mean, I've done a lot of the work in the psychedelic medicine space. I was training at one point to be a facilitator in that space. And like eventually, and it obviously depends on who you're learning from and the communities and whatever, but like you can see the dysfunctional dynamics that take place just within the leaders and the people underneath. There's this weird codependency and emotional enmeshment and people getting taken advantage of and weird power dynamics. Like when you're dealing with somebody's traumas and fears and hopes and dreams and greatest desires, people are incredibly vulnerable. And there's no ethical or moral guidance that ethically that exists in like the therapy space. You learn about that, whatever, but like the moral truth, the precondition of it was religious institutions previously. And I think the absence of that has led to this vacuum where now this overflow of this energy can actually cause a lot of damage for people. That's
yeah.
all a hard question. It's hard for me to explain that. I probably didn't do a very good job, but
No, I mean, we're pretty deep into this stuff now. I'm definitely out of my depths. So that's why I'm just asking you a bunch of questions, to be honest. But no, I've written a tweet about it one time, like the spiritual supremacists, where they
yeah.
hold their spirituality as like this moral high ground, when in reality, like if you were so holistically spiritually aligned, spirituality can become its own dogmatic religion, it seems to me, where oh, now you learn about spirituality, you learn about like non-dualist thinking, and now you look at every other religion as dumb and you just put them down, but you've just created your own religion, right? Like the truth was probably transcending both. But like the people that are into the spiritual stuff, even though in our corner of the internet and maybe where I'm in Austin now, you're in LA, people are more inclined to it. But like where I grew up in the Midwest in Illinois, I never heard the word spiritual until probably a year ago. It was never something that was discussed. And what I've noticed is like the new religion for people in the Midwest, at least from my personal experiences, the religion is sports, the religion is celebrities. And the older men who should be the vessels to a higher purpose, a higher spiritual pursuit, they aren't able to pass down these actually like integrated lessons to becoming spiritually inclined masculine men because they are not living in it themselves. Like I can just think about personal examples, 50-year-old men I know in my life, etc. These topics were never discussed. The only thing that was discussed is like business success and sports success.
Yeah,
And so that's why I think so many young men are lost right now because the people they've been guided by, or the people they look up to in their life, aren't providing them with that holistic wisdom that includes some type of higher purpose or spiritual pursuit. It's all surface level and shallow and hedonistic.
for sure. And it doesn't emphasize the internal growth. And, I think one of the big problems in, you look at a city like LA or Austin, and with this huge emphasis on spirituality and whatever, is like it actually breeds greater individualism, because no, my individual spirituality is different and separate and better than yours, right? There's like this still greater differentiation because everyone has their own religion and spirituality. So there's no like precondition in which we're operating from. But I think, and this is what's been helpful for me just in looking at like the generational components a little bit, because you're totally right about that. But even just zooming out a little bit and looking at like, okay, so our grandparents really grew up or came to age, I guess maybe during the Great Depression. It was like there's no time for like it's just
Mm,
survival at that point, And so like and then if that is the information that is transmitted to my parents or our parents, like it's not all about like fault. I think there's just like there's massive collective implications. I'm kind of getting out of my depth here a little bit too, but yeah, I find it really interesting. But like, what is an obsession with sport, but of different version of
mm,
religiosity,
exactly.
right? And sort of that tribalistic thinking too. And ultimately, we all want to be a part of something, and we all want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves that has some ultimate ideal that we're moving towards. That's what sport is. That's what religion is. Like, it serves a function in our psyche to have that available.
Mm,
I 100% know. It serves a function.
definitely. If it didn't, it wouldn't be so prevalent. And it was my religion for 21 years when I played. Like it was everything to me. And that I had to
Yeah.
shed those layers of identity and let that go. And I don't think many people do that because they don't do the inner work or they don't have a life-changing experience that causes them to lose the identity. And so that's why I think you see millions, tens of millions of 50, 60-year-old men who their entire life's purpose and enjoyment is watching 20-year-olds play football on TV. That's like my biggest fear. That's what drove me to all of this stuff.
Yeah, you've had an incredible renaissance over the last 18 months, last year.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Being in this creator game, it like your rate of development is accelerated so much because we're on the edge of a frontier where
Yeah.
like I get to talk to you about these crazy esoteric topics that I would never talk about with anybody in my hometown. Like the internet is absolutely incredible. And then plus like a lot of travel, psychedelics, like all those things have like really changed me in the last 18 months. Actually, like my sister goes to the University of Iowa, and a lot of my hometown friends go to the University of Iowa. It's like this hub for the upper middle class white Republican type of kid who's like pretty smart and ambitious and comes from a good
Yep.
family. That's like the archetype. And they have asked her, they're like, what happened to Jack? Like, what is wrong with him? He's so different now. And I'm like, okay, like I actually take that as a massive compliment.
You should. You should. Yeah, that's interesting. It's like yeah, it brings to mind a little bit of just, there's some theories around like birth order and stuff like that, which is kind of interesting, or even like in family therapy, family dynamics of like the one child who is kind of known as like the black sheep of the family. They're actually usually the most authentically attuned to their own feelings, but they get othered through that differentiation, right? So like that's you getting othered by them. You're not
Yeah,
fitting in
yeah,
that norm anymore, so now you're an other.
yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And it brings to mind one thing I heard from I went to therapy for probably about a year and a half. I still will call my therapist once every like maybe couple months just to like have a conversation. She's been really valuable throughout my journey, like over the past 2, 3 years, because she knew me before any of the business creator entrepreneur stuff. And so it's like very helpful to talk with her about some things. But she told me at one point, because I was having such a hard time relating to my parents when I was starting to get into open mindedness, like, wait, like these liberal kids at college are actually like onto something. Like, and I couldn't understand why they couldn't see it the same way. And she said, sometimes kids can outgrow their parents psychologically. And I never like could understand that before because I always saw like age as just the ultimate arbiter of wisdom and understanding and development. But when she said that, I realized that we mature psychologically, it seems, through experiences more than years necessarily. And so, for young people out there, like if your parents aren't understanding what you're doing, like it's not the fault of them and it's not the fault of you. You might have just outgrown them in different ways. Would
For
you agree
sure.
with that?
Yeah, yeah. I think I hesitate with like like I like the outgrowing because it provides a framework, but I try and go beyond the superior and inferior sort of framework a little bit. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
yeah,
But I do think that we we play a role to a certain point until that role no longer serves us, and then it disrupts the previous equilibrium and homeostasis of the family unit. And then if somebody does, through leaving the role and go through a process to sort of transcend their own role, their old role, and then in a return, you kind of end up establishing a new homeostasis or equilibrium in the family. And yes, maybe it's a little bit more elevated. So as a result of that, you're pulling the family dynamic up with you as well. Does that make
yeah,
sense?
yeah. That's fascinating. That's really interesting because I have one younger sister. She's 2 years younger than me. She's 20, and there's been these like slight cracks. Like if she's an egg and there's an eggshell, there's these slight cracks where I see her like mind starting to open up a little bit to like new ways of being. She texted me one time. She's like I don't know what's happening to me. I stayed in my apartment this weekend. I didn't go out and I journaled and read. Like I'm scared I'm turning into you.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
was like, is that such a bad thing? Like, what's so bad?
That's really funny, man. And that's dude, I mean, this is in the Bible, bro. This is like the prodigal son story.
What is that?
It's that, so there are two sons, and one of them,
Is this Cain and Abel?
no, it's different. I actually it's basically the idea that is it Cain and Abel? If you look it up. Anyways, the son leaves, right? And then when has to go and fail and actually like sins, and
Mm.
then he returns and like gets his father's favor and ends up like changing the family dynamic, whatever. I'm not really sure on the whole like the metaphor along with it. But yeah, that archetype of like the prodigal son, just like I identify with, like I got sober at a really young age. I was really destructive. And then now I've like sort of come back around, and it's like I've gone through this whole healing process. And so I end up like encouraging more emotional connection or like mental health emphasis or whatever than in the return, where like before it was just fucking chaos.
Mm, mm. And what was the catalyst for your transformation at that young age?
I mean, abstinence from drugs and alcohol is a big one, but I went to a wilderness therapy program in Hawaii and I went and worked on a farm for like 5 months. And my therapist at the time, I didn't have a phone or internet for that entire time. So it was like this massive digital, detox, just complete disconnect. And then I moved down to Panama. I lived overseas and in Central America for like 5 months. And I just had this, yeah, I think like I've always been a person who can hear and also adhere to my own, I call it the restless whisper, which is just like this intuitive thing that just kind of like gnaws at you. That's like, there's something more. You should do this. There's something bigger. Like I've always been able to hear that, and I've always had the courage to take action from that place. Um, but I was an athlete as well. I mean, I was a very serious tennis and lacrosse player. I was getting recruited to play in college, and I blew out my knee twice within 10 months, and I had to find this whole new identity. But as a result of me deciding to leave college and go to Hawaii and work on this farm, I got introduced to therapy. And then that's when I started reading Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell, which just fucking rocketed me into the fourth dimension. So I think
Yeah.
it was me asking for help, admitting some aspect of like surrender and letting go by leaving college and saying I needed a new path. That wound has now turned me directly onto my biggest gift.
Mm, yes. I love that. I think a massive pattern interrupt like that in your life is so necessary to like step back and zoom out and ask yourself who you really are. And it's interesting,
Yeah.
in those 5 months you found your new life's path when you didn't really have anything going on other than just like working on the farm, kind of taking it probably slower, I assume. The same thing happened for me when I took 3 months and backpacked Europe. That's how I started writing. Like I started writing
Sick.
to myself. And then I was like, fuck, should I send like maybe I should send these ideas to like some of my friends and family. And then I sent a newsletter to like 7 people. And then it just spirals up. But it's like you only can reach those breakthroughs, finding those deeper parts of yourself by completely going off the grid for 3 months and just like wandering around. I wrote about that today. Like I think every young 20-year old, 20, 25, 30-year old taking 3 months to stop running on this treadmill or like running in this rat race where you're just trying to achieve, strive, get to the next thing, and just totally taking a step back and having no obligations. I think it maybe is the most valuable thing that any young person could do.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, man. And well, that's beautiful. What a beautiful experience for you. That was similar for me again this last summer because, I've been coaching offline for 8 years now. And, I've been working as a therapist for a couple. And so I have so much experience, but never in the online game. And this past summer, I went and walked the Camino del Santiago in Europe. I walked up 230 miles up the coast of Portugal over 11 days. And it was during that period when I like really started to like focus in on sort of my brand and content strategy and how I wanted to attack this game.
What is the walk called? I want to write it down because I am
It's called
planning on doing a Europe trip again this summer.
it's called the
And
Camino del Santiago. And so there's a couple different
Camino.
paths. There's like a Frances way. You can go through Spain. I did the Portuguese path, but it's incredible. Dude. It's really supported. So it's like not dangerous. You'll meet a bunch of other cool travelers and stuff. And yeah, dude, it was amazing.
I'm feeling inspired. I might have to ask you more about that off air.
Anytime, brother.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, we've been going on for a minute here. So I do want to finish it with one more question to like finalize it and wrap it up. So we talked about how so many young men are obsessed with the pursuits of sports or business. And I fall into that bucket too. But what is a more worthy pursuit for their life? What's a pursuit with more depth to become a more whole, integrated version of themselves?
I wouldn't say more worthy. I just think that the goal is wholeness as opposed to perfection. And if you have a natural inclination towards business or sport, put effort into developing your creative outlet or these other aspects of yourself that are, quote, inferior or don't come as easy to you. And as you become more of a polymath and begin to develop these different personalities that exist within yourself, you'll actually see how they're all kind of one and the same. All of the
Mm,
principles, all the frameworks, all the philosophies, like there's all of this transference that takes place across all these different disciplines.
mm,
But I really encourage people, not just young men, people, especially in these entrepreneurial or online spaces, people talk so much about like building up your mind, cultivating your mind. Like, is there so much emphasis on like your thinking? And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. You actually get like a way higher ROI if you build up your heart and your emotions and specifically your relational capacities and your relational skills. Because even in business or what it's all relational skills. Being a professional human, which is like the name of my brand, like it's all just about relating to life, relating to self, relating to business. It's all in your relationship. It's all dynamic. So if you learn greater heart oriented skills, greater emotional skills, just nobody can take that away. And I think it provides a way greater return than intellect. I just think, our minds are incredibly limited.
mm. What a different take on masculinity than anything I've heard. I love it. Like opening the heart, integrating the emotions. I think I might title this something like cultivating healthy masculinity. I'm going to scheme on it. Maybe I'll ask you for
Yeah.
advice on that idea.
Generative.
But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
generative, yeah, generative masculinity. I love it. Well, anyways, dude, thank you for coming on. Before we hop, where can people find you at? And again, what can they expect from you?
Yeah, so they can find me on X. That's sort of my flagship platform right now. My ad is I am pro human. So my brand's name is Professional Human. You can find me on Instagram at Brian Maierhofer, and then on YouTube as well. I'm not sure if it's at Brian. I think it's at Brian Maierhofer on YouTube as well. But those are the three big places. Yeah, what can you expect? I got some cool stuff coming down the pipeline. I got this free somatic therapy product that I'm working on right now, just kind of like an intro course to give people some of the specifics. Um, yeah, and ultimately, I feel like my job as a creator is just to raise collective consciousness.
Mm,
That's really what I want to do. Is I want to just provide people with the tools that are both really practical and also timeless.
mm.
So
I love it. That's what this is moving towards, I think, in the long run. Like, it's beyond the money, it's beyond the followers, beyond the status. It's actually raising collective consciousness. So I think that's a great place to end it. Thank you, man. This was awesome.
yeah, brother. Thank you.